Good evening to all those who are viewing and are here with us today. Welcome to the Objective Students Career Conclave 2020 by HP and Intel in association with Better Photography. These sessions are meant for students who are looking out to gain a foothold, an understanding of subjects, an understanding of topics, processes, and approaches, and an understanding of the path forward. Continuing with our mission for making learning fun, we have invited some of the most well known professionals from across India who have carved out their own legacies and carved out space for themselves in today's difficult media environment. One of the challenges we all face is that of composition. Everything needs composition, whether we know it or not. Think about it. Painting requires composition of subject, form, color, balance. Any painting, any kind of painting, even abstracts, requires composition. So does sculpture. And what about music? There can be no music without composition. In fact, some forms of music have composers who create but don't perform the music. This is not just within the arts. What does it mean when we speak of someone who is self-composed or well composed? As humans, we can choose to be composed, or rather, we can compose ourselves. And at a basic level, whether it be painting, sculpture, music, or humans or ourselves, the guidelines of composing are not all that very different. In today's webinar, our main speaker will be speaking of composition from a photographic point of view. Be it a cell phone or a DSLR, composition can make or break an image. Today, we have Ashima Raizada, a photographer and a visual artist, speak to us on the topic of the challenges of composition. But before we have Ashima address the audience, we have a short presentation for you from HP. Once again, thank you, Ashima. Thank you to all the viewers. Thank you for being with us. Before we move on to our main speaker for today, please let me introduce you to Akshay Bakchandani from HP, who will be speaking about the HP Chromebook series of laptops. These multifunctional devices are especially perfect for students, but they fit many requirements as well. And Akshay is here to speak about just this. Over to you, Akshay.
Well, a very good evening to one and all, and thank you so much, Madman, for introducing me. I welcome each one of you to the session by HP, and I hope all of you are maintaining social distancing and are keeping yourself safe and healthy at homes. Well, my name is Akshay, and I feel we all have a better understanding how technology acts as an enabler for us and how it helps you gain education as well as explore your creativity. So, all the students out there by creativity, I also mean not just keeping another device right next to your laptop for the streaming purposes while having your classes. So let me just quickly go through some of the features of Chromebook, which can be really useful to study or work during these times. Well, first question that arises is what is a Chromebook and why is it so important? A Chromebook is essentially a laptop that is based only on the Google operating system. To all those who do not like to go for Windows operating system and keep it very simple, choose a browser like a Google Chromebook, which makes work very easy because of its five major USPs like, yes, we have the five S's: smart, speed, security, simplicity, and shareable. Let's start with speed. So till that very moment, in fact, till today, even I did not have any device that can boot under 30 seconds. But when we talk about HP Chromebook, yes, that boots under 10 seconds. So no long load times, no confusing setup. Chrome operating system is designed to be fast and very light. Updates automatically in the background, so doesn't slow over time and no manual intervention at all. Talking from the security point of view, start from the verified board, perform self check-ins to repair any system corruptions, always ready security with built-in virus protection and auto updates. Sandboxing, web pages and apps run in isolated environment to prevent infection from at-risk pages. Talking about the simplicity, my dear friends, it is extremely familiar, easy to use, and no setup is needed at all. Just log in with your Google account, and the intuitive Chrome and Android ecosystem has 1 million plus Android apps from Play Store for work, play, create, watch, and listen. It is extremely shareable. Collaborate on a project on Google Documents, Sheets, and Slides with automatic saving of files. Well, the connected, created, and the collaborated files are backed up in the cloud and are available anytime across all the devices. Easy multi accounts login for every single person. Just switch on the account and get your personalized experience. Well, when our smartphones are getting smart and we need to get smarter in the adaptable times, yes, the HP Chromebooks are extremely smart because they have got the learn, adapt, and evolve feature in them. Make Google Assistant do every single thing for you. You do not even need to lift a finger or switch your screens. Make Google do it all. Access the Chromebook with smart lock on the phone with local language inbuilt. Yes, work in any language. So coming to the next most impressive part, how can Chromebooks be used for work from home as well as learn from home? By reimagining your office Chromebooks are secure, simple, and shareable devices that helps you stay productive and connected. Here are some helpful tips for working from home. Simple setup. Yes, setting up HP Chromebook is extremely easy. Simply log in into your Google account and access all your Google Drive files and Chrome preferences on your Chromebook. Apps that get the job done. Google Play provides access to apps for getting work done, like Microsoft Word and the Google Docs, as well as video conferencing apps for collaborating remotely with teams like Google Meet and Zoom. Absolutely. No monitor, but still no issue for us. Just cast your Google Chrome browser tabs to Chromecast enabled TV or use virtual desks to expand your desktop. Work safely from home. Chromebooks keep you and your data safe from malware, thanks to multiple layers of security and automatic updates. So here comes the main point. Why Chromebook is extremely special for students. Well, world of Android apps on a laptop that runs over a million of your favorite Android apps and more for a bigger, more immersive experience. Example, gaming apps, streaming apps, office, editing apps at a certain level. We have the voice enabled Google Assistant, works on your speech and your words. Play, send emails, setups, all HP Chromebooks are Google Assistant enabled. And last but not the least, let's tell you about the extraordinary features of Google Chromebook. Chromebooks work offline as well. Yes, no Wi-Fi, no problem at all. Because HP Chromebooks have access to lots of applications that work online or offline just like any other laptop. So you can do things like edit docs with Google Docs, making a work of Microsoft Word, watch movies with Prime Video and Netflix app, or download playlists on Ghana and Spotify. Play games in the offline game apps. Now, Chromebooks have a Microsoft Office entirely for free. Microsoft Office is available on the Google Play Store where you can download the apps you want. Word, Excel, PowerPoint. Work on Microsoft Office programs free from Chrome Web Store. You can also open, edit, and save Microsoft in the Google Drive. Now, one thing that comes to our mind, if all this is coming, then where to store it, right? Then here comes a triple whammy for each one of you because HP Chromebooks come with a hard drive, cloud storage, as well as a micro SD card slot. 64 GB SSD on board, 100 GB Google Cloud, and 256 GB of expandable micro SD, whopping 420 GB, my friends. So there's one thing that students really like and their parents even more. So we have a G Suite for education. Communicate, email, and VC. Collaborate. You can edit spreadsheets, document in real time. Manage. Yes, you can create classrooms, distribute assignments, and send feedbacks at the same time. Administer. You can add students, manage devices, and configure devices for security data. So that's all from my side. Thank you one and all for being present here and for your patient listening, and request you to please go and explore the HP Chromebook at the near HP World Show. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Akshay, for detailing out the many features of the HP Chromebook for all of us. And with that, we come to today's webinar. In today's webinar with Ashima Raizada, she will touch upon the rules of composition, understanding composition in tandem with the history of photography, what makes composition good or bad, and how to overcome the challenges while composing a photograph. Let me tell you a little bit about Ashima. Ashima Raizada is an artist engaged in exploring the possibilities for the coexistence of opposites through the intersection of everyday objects and mediums in innovative combinations. Her practice involves an investigation in colors, materials, space, philosophy, and how the synthesis of these concepts takes the form of paintings, photographs, and drawings. She has exhibited at the Uniqlo Tates, the Tate Modern Gallery in 2020, and she has been an artist in residence at the Piramal Art Residency in Thane in 2019. Ashima has received the State Award from Chandigarh Lalit Kala Akademi in 2018 and was awarded the Raghu Rai Scholarship in Multimedia Arts by Punjab Lalit Kala Akademi in 2017. Very significant achievements, both. She was chosen by the Hindustan Times as one of the top 30 under 30 young achievers in 2018. She's currently working as the photo editor for Blink Dolta. Thank you so much for joining us here this evening, Ashima. The stage is yours.
Thanks, Madhavan, for the wonderful introduction. So, first of all, I'd like to thank everyone for taking out the time to join this webinar. And I hope every one of you is taking the required precautions to be safe in this one of a kind pandemic. And without further ado, I'd like to jump right into our topic of discussion for today, which is the challenges of composition. I will be presenting my screen so that whatever I'm talking about is something that you can see and read as well. One second. All right. So I'd like to start with this particular statement first of all. Even though I've mentioned photographers here, but I'd like to extend this to artists in general of any levels who are practicing any art form, that you should not be so much fixated on the kind of gear that you're using to kind of make art. This is one of the questions that a lot of people have asked me and still ask me, that what kind of an equipment are you using, what is the model of the camera, you know and I actually want to say to them that you're actually missing the point here. But this is something that one should always keep in mind, that it is not initially about the instrument or the equipment that you're using to make art. The more important thing is understanding the basics of uh, the practice that you're doing, or the form of art that you're pursuing. So let's talk about composition. So first of all, like this particular word which is thrown around so much, what does that exactly mean? what does composition really means. To simply put, it is just an arrangement of the visual elements or the organization of the elements of art. So, what are these visual elements that we are referring to here? Visual elements, uh, let's say that, for instance, you are walking down a street and you see like a kid playing with his dog in a park, and you would like to take a picture of that. So, when you have taken a picture of that, and when you see that image, so the kid, the dog, the park, the swings, the sky, everything constitutes the visual elements or the elements of art. And I think these visual elements are the ones which kind of forms the basis of any work of art. It could be a photograph, or it could be a painting, or it could be a sculpture, or anything for that matter. These visual elements, or there's another way of saying it, they're also called the points of interest. Now, these points of interest are the ones which will make any viewer fixate on that particular work of art, or any photograph for that matter. Like how long that gaze will be intended over it. So, this is what really kind of, determines that how long and for how much time a person will be looking at it and will be interested in it and having a moment. So, we will be also talking about some principles of organization. These principles of organization are basically, uh, how you can use these points of interest or these visual elements to kind of compose your images or your paintings or many other things that can be done with it. So I will be showing you certain images, and depending on that, we will be discussing about different principles of organizations here. So first of all, there are these two images by a very famous photographer, Henry Cartier-Bresson. So I mean, if you look closely, let's talk about this image on the left side. First of all, we are referring to a very important principle of organization, which is the positioning or the harmony between the different visual elements. If you see this image properly, you would see that how the different elements, they are coming together in a very harmonious and rhythmic way. Similarly, for the image on the right side, if you see different visual elements like the person, the birds, the staircase, how everything is coming together in some sort of a unity or in some sort of a harmony, and it is kind of pleasing to the eyes. You don't feel awkward looking at these images. The other thing that one can notice here is the use of lines, or how your gaze kind of follows a certain direction. Like the way the photographer has taken this image, I mean, if you notice, your eyes are following certain paths in certain directions. And I think that's very important, because when you're looking at an image, it needs to engage you. And when there is that sort of like a rhythm or a movement, then it becomes easier for you to look at it for a much longer time. Similarly, for this image, I mean, if you see that how there is a kind of movement uh, within, like with this staircase, and how your gaze is kind of going with it, you know. Uh, the another principle of organization that we can notice here is the understanding of perspective. Also, like, just imagine that if the photographer would have been a little on the left side, and just imagine if this particular staircase would have been extended a little on the right, so that would have caused a lot of imbalance within this image. Similarly with this, I mean, just imagine if this staircase would have been a little aligned towards the center, so that it would have completely like caused a lot of imbalance within the image. It is balanced because the way it has been cropped, or the way it has been framed a certain way, like the field of view is very, very well done, and it's a fragmented field of view. And as an artist, it's your choice. What do you want to show, and what do you want to deduct from your surroundings? Moving on to another principle of organization, we're going to talk about the negative space here and how this image depicts beautifully the use of negative space. Negative space is basically any space which is around the visual elements. Now, if you see here, there's a lot of space around the visual elements, and it kind of hides the subjects in a way where there is a kind of mystery that is rendered to this image. I mean, now very subtle elements, you can say, or certain qualities of these subjects which is being highlighted, which otherwise we would not pay attention to in a normal scenario. So this is how you can also use negative space, or how photographers use negative space in their work. Let's talk about contrast. So these two images are by one of my favorite photographers, Bruce Gilden. So I mean, the first thing that we notice about these images is that how stark they are in their appearance. I mean, the kind of impact that they have when you look at them. Apart from choosing those kind of subjects which are intriguing and which are kind of controversial, the way these images have been treated is very important, and which actually brings us to this point of contrast, that how contrast plays a very important role in creating a kind of an impact, and it leaves a kind of quality to these images that kind of makes them unforgettable. I mean, so this is also, I mean, one can take cue from looking at these images and understand that how contrast, which is the degree of lightness or darkness, can really change the perception of how we are viewing these images. Let's talk about this particular image. It's a very simple street image, but the beauty actually lies in how there is a simultaneous lightness and darkness sort of a situation happening. And lighting or illumination is again one of very key factors when it comes to composing your images or your photographs. And this would have been a very simple image had there not been these kind of contrast, or had these two different color spectrums coexisting simultaneously. So this is, I think, a great example to illustrate how illumination or lighting can have that sort of an impact, and how can it create a simple image into a much more interesting and then a much more visually appealing sort of an image. Now let's talk about one of my favorites and one of my what I think is one of a very important element, visual element, which comes into the principles of organization, which is perspective. So perspective, to simply define it, it just kind of is a way of representing positioning, size, or depth in a particular image. Like you're trying to convert a 3D scene in a 3D scene into a 2D scene, but how do you do that? You do that by playing with the idea of perspective. I mean, just imagine that if this particular element, which is on the right side, if that was absent, this would have been a very simple, generic beach image. And that's about it. But the fact that the photographer decided to add this particular element and using this, his point of view, and then taking this image is just completely transforming our understanding of this particular photograph, because now we can see the depth of the field. Now we can also estimate the different sizes of the different elements, and it just completely transforms the whole imagery. So playing with perspective is really important, and it's a lot of fun. And this particular image completely illustrates that point. Moving on, I'd like to now talk about the evolution of composition. So we've covered like the important aspects or the traditional ways by which we understand composition, or how we can compose photographs. And I have talked about photographs only till now, but now we will be talking in terms of how composition plays a very important role in paintings. And through that, we can understand that how did we come uh, in the contemporary scene, like where the contemporary art is right now, how did we ended up being there? So let's get a little involved in that. So somewhere around in the 20th century, there was like a collective shift in the minds of the artists where they were moving away from the actual or the realistic representation, and they were pushing the boundaries and going towards an abstract representation of things, and they were more interested now in finding different dimensions to the work that they were doing. So it was not just about 2D or 3D. Now they wanted to go 4D or 5D, and how do you do that? So let's look at this composition by this artist Jackson Pollock. So Jackson Pollock is considered the father of abstract expressionism. And if you look at this particular work, it's been created by him just by dripping the paint over the board. And it's called an action painting because when the artist was dripping the paint over this particular board, he was also moving around it. So there is a lot of action and there's a lot of fluidity and movement involved in it. And now, since we have covered the basics of composition and how we view composition traditionally, this is very different from that. This is actually challenging those certain values that we just laid down, that, okay, using this, you can see this, or using that, you can see this. This is just very different. This is out of the box. This is a very irrational representation of it because he was more interested in gesture or the organic sensation of it rather than a rational representation of it. Let's talk about this particular painting. So again, this painting is by Vasily Kandinsky, and he is a very dominant figure in abstract art world. And he would always title his works as composition 1, composition 2, composition 8, like this is called composition 8. So what he's saying here is that whatever he has created, I mean, there's a lot of geometry and shapes involved in it, but whatever he has created, he's considering that to be a composition in itself as well. I mean, if you look at it very closely, you will see that there is a certain internal structure to it, even though uh, it might not be in adherence to what we just talked about, like how we can view composition. But still, I mean, if you look at it closely, there is a kind of symmetry and there is a kind of movement even between so many elements. So Pete Mondrian. Okay, so this is interesting actually. So this is Pete Mondrian drawing paintings of trees in 1911. And this is Pete Mondrian drawing these boxes, squares, and rectangles in 1920. And these are trees only, but the representation has changed dramatically in whatever the time duration is. So the basic idea of Pete Mondrian was like he took cues from Cubism. So he said that I am going to see the nature. I mean, I'm going to see different elements of the nature, but I'm going to reduce them to their most basic shapes. So, I mean, if you see, there is already a little bit of structuring that is happening, and then it automatically gets converted into these very rigid structures. And this is the transition that happened over the years. So, I mean, as you can see, like how that composition over the years have evolved, and how I discussed about the different values or the different elements of composition, how they have dramatically, shifted, and how these different compositions have challenged those ideas of, composition. So let's move on further. Now we'll talk about a little bit about understanding composition in contemporary art. Now since I've discussed the different principles of organization of these visual elements, I've taken examples of photographs and I've also taken examples of painting. And why I've done this is because now we are in a space where we don't have any boundaries between the mediums. You can combine, you can mix, you can match, and then you can create your own composition. And that is what is the challenge of, and that is actually what is challenging to the whole idea of composition, because we try to find a certain kind of a place where we try to define that this is good or this is not good. But now in the contemporary sense of everything, you cannot really judge that easily, that what is good and what is not good. It's completely opened up, and it's really about how effectively you are challenging those ideas constantly, and how you're challenging somebody's perception of looking at composition. So I think a lot of people do not really understand what does this word contemporary art means. I mean, we say this very often, like I've used contemporary art so many times while I'm speaking, but what does it really means? It's really simple, actually. It means that any form of art which has been created in the space and time between today and the earliest inception of that particular medium. So during all that while, whatever work has been created can be kind of labeled as contemporary art, and it is constantly changing and it's constantly revolving. I mean, you look at the society right now, you look at the world right now. World is a very dynamic place to be, and it's not static. So because the world is such a dynamic place, so the ideologies, the philosophies, the technology, the geographical topologies, everything is constantly changing. And whenever any work of art is being made during that point of time, it's kind of a reflection or an opinion about what the world was like at that point of time. So, like how Roland Barthes in Reflections on Photography states that photography does not necessarily say what it is no longer, but only for certain what has been. So, it's like kind of like an introspection and reflection. Now, look at these two works, which I would say are very recent and which are very in sync with what is really going on right now in terms of how photography has evolved, or how art or the medium of painting or the mediums of sculpture has evolved. Now, I mean, if you see this, unfortunately, I could not find the name of this artist, but I think this particular image on the left side belongs to the genre of sculptural photography. So, what really is going on here is that, first of all, we were talking about the elements of composition only about a photograph. But now we are talking about the composition in context to this whole sculpture, maybe, that we are seeing right now. So, then our focus is kind of diverted, because now we want to see composition not only in a particular one medium, but how it has become a big part of the medium. So now only the photograph does not have visual elements. This whole sculpture has many visual elements, and a photograph belongs to that sculpture. So it becomes one of those visual elements. And that really changes everything, that really changes the whole idea of composition that we've been trying to understand. Similarly, for this particular image, I find it very interesting, because just imagine, I mean, if these two visual elements weren't there, this would have been just a photograph, and the impact that it would have had was, I would say, it would have been something. But now, because of the addition of these two visual elements, it completely changes your way of looking at it. And you would be more interested in knowing that what is really going on here. So there's a lot of, like mixed media approach to it. And how did that happen actually? It happened because, as you saw, that there is a transition in the composition within the paintings, and how there are certain values of composition within the photographs, and now everything is coming together. So there is no space left within the mediums, they're all just intermingled, and this is what we get in the contemporary sense of it. This image, for me, is kind of a very unique sort of a perception, because this lady, she is playing with the idea of time here. So Like how when I was talking about composition, understanding the evolution of composition. So how I said that the artists at that point of time in 20th century, they were trying to find the different dimensions in their work, and they wanted to go beyond the three dimensions, and they wanted to bring in different elements, time being one of the most important elements. So this photograph really encapsulates the element of time for me. The way the element of time has been materialized in this particular image. And it also talks about, how our understanding of time is. We always think that it's very linear, but it's not really linear. There is always something or the other happening. It doesn't matter if you're witnessing it or not, but it is always happening. So time is kind of twisted that way. So this is what I kind of understand from it. So finally, coming to certain tips and suggestions that I'd like to give about composing your images. When it comes to composing your images. Okay. So the first thing is pick one of the principles of organization and create a body of work around it. So I've tried doing this, and I think it has worked quite well for me, because when you try to take one element, let's say you want to work with perspective. Perspective is one thing that I really like to work with. So if you want to work with perspective, so what happens is that your mind will try to do many other things. Yeah, when you go about taking images, you're always like erratic and you want to take images of everything. But when you tell your mind that no, I want to, you know work around one particular visual element, and this is what I'm going to stick to, it's kind of challenging, but I think it will bring that discipline within you, and that will kind of help you to adhere to that discipline, and will help you to really think and make you conscious. Actually, when we take images, we are not very conscious and aware of what we're doing. It's a very subconscious process after a while. But then again, bringing that awareness that no, I want to stick to this particular theme, to this one element that I'm going to work around, and then keep bringing yourself back to it, is what is going to challenge you. And I think there is some wonderful things that can come out of this. Secondly, don't be fixated on the equipments or gears. This is what I started with. And why I say this is because a lot of times I see people thinking that if they have, XYZ equipment, or they have XYZ paint or XYZ brushes, only then they will be able to create good work. But that's not really true, because you are kind of obstructing yourself and telling yourself that this is only how you will be able to produce good work. Whereas you don't need anything to produce good work. You can just start with whatever you have and then go about producing anything that you want. And then maybe once you have basic understanding of things, then maybe you can start thinking on those lines. You just don't have to start with it initially, because that will stop you more than it will motivate you to do it, and you will end up losing interest, and that's the pretty much the end of it. Third point is, this is actually the most important point, even though it's a third point, but this is like a really important point for me, which is the development of mind is more crucial than the development of skill. I mean, it can be simultaneous, but for me, what I think is that for me, it comes primary. You need to work on developing your mind. You need to work on reading about what you're pursuing. And if you're not keen on reading, just observe life. Be very observant of the environment that you're in. And I say observant, it doesn't mean that you just blankly look here and there. What I mean to say is that take in whatever you're seeing within your environment, mull over it, think about it, and then try to, use it as a material to create whatever you want to create, because then the work that will be created will be more individualistic and will be more in sync with what you actually think about the world around. Fourth is unlearn. I think this is very important, because we live in a time where there is a lot of, there is a great amount of um, visual data that is coming in, and we're constantly bombarded with so much imagery. So it's very important that whatever you see, um, you do not take everything in. Like, you do not have to emulate all the time what you're seeing. Okay, you can take pictures of whatever you want to. You don't have to take pictures of certain things to start out. Okay, you can just play around as much as you can. You don't even have to take pictures actually. You can just do whatever you want to, whatever gets you started. But do not follow certain trails that okay, this person did this or this person did that, so I need to follow this in order to reach wherever that person is. Everybody forms their own trail. So keep shedding all those ideas in your head, because that will make room for you to learn much better, much important things in life. And I think lastly, I'd like to say that be open minded. So when I say be open minded, is don't think that you're pursuing photography, so it has to be pursued only in a certain fashion, or if you are painting, so it has to be pursued only in a certain fashion. Try to mold, or try to break, or try to twist, or try to distort those mediums, because that is what is going to actually bring new things. That's how you're going to be in that inventive mode. If you're going to follow and you're going to be very traditional in your approach initially, I think that's not, that is always, that is being in a certain mold, but then it will be very hard for you to break it eventually. So just be open minded, learn about different things, don't be scared to try different things, or be very unrestricted in your approach when it comes to creative pursuits. So that's it from me. Thank you. And if you guys have any questions, I would love to talk about them and help you guys out with it.
Thank you so much, Ashima. That was uh, it really opened up minds. Um, and so now we move on to our Q&A session. There have been a few questions that have come in from the audience, which I will read out shortly. Ashima, can you please stop sharing your screen?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Is that okay? Yeah.
Thank you, Ashima. That was actually quite wonderful. It was also quite informative. I'm glad that you took the audience through the painting aspect and contemporary and the older forms of ideas of composition. So there are questions that have come up from the audience now, and I shall sort of take you through them one by one.
Sure.
We have a little bit of time left, and I think we can answer some of these questions.
Of course.
So the first question that came up, which I think you answered a little later, but I think I'm going to ask the question again. You mentioned not to fixate on gear, but is there any gear or technology that helps with composition while one is shooting?
Okay, so I don't really have any problem with talking about gears. I just had a problem with it when people, kind of, that's the first thing that they ask about instead of, talking about the basics of what they're trying to pursue. So I started taking photographs. I had like a Samsung Galaxy Note at that point of time, like 4, 5 years back. And I just started taking photographs with that. And I feel that the good part about the phone is, because I started with it, is that it's really it's easy. It's easy because it's always there, and secondly because the accessibility part of it. So you don't have to feel hesitant that okay, you're carrying such a big equipment around, and people tend to get kind of intimidated when you're like trying to shoot on the street and everything. But just for practice purposes, I think everybody nowadays has a smartphone, so they can try using that. You have a grid option in the phones as well, and you can use those grids and those layouts to you know frame certain scenes, or take images. I still use the first camera that I bought, which was Nikon D3300. I still have it. I haven't like upgraded it because I'm pretty happy with the kind of results I get from it. And yeah, that's about it. So I think that works for me.
I think that is a fair point. In fact, there's a question that I think is related to this question the answer that you've given, but I will, go question by question. So there is a question from someone. He says, "I'm a student of photography. I have read about many of them, and by them, I'm guessing it means uh, many compositional guidelines.
Right.
But they are so difficult to make harmonious. I can't use them more than maybe one rule at a time. How do
Right.
I overcome this?"
So I think in the end of my presentation, that was my first point, that uh, just pick one particular, principle of organization, as I call it, but you can just pick one element. Like, you can say that, okay, I'm going to just work with color, or you can say that I can just work with perspective. So what happens is that when you try to say this to yourself, that okay, I'm just going to work with one visual element now, so then your mind starts kind of narrowing down. And even if you're seeing work which is related to that particular visual element, then it becomes easy for you to even grasp and understand that how those images are being composed. So I would recommend that if you're starting out and if you have trouble with compositional troubles. So I would say just pick one element, whatever you like, whatever you're interested in, and just try to stay with it as long as you can, and then see how um, your understanding of composition through that particular element is getting developed. And once you kind of know that, okay, I've done so much with this element, then maybe you can move on to other. And that's how you start developing your mind and understanding of composition. So, yeah.
That I think was quite well answered. There is a question again related to your answer, which I'm going to ask now. That is, what would you say is the most important composition guideline or rule that you have used?
Compositional guideline that I've used. Okay, so when I started taking photographs, so everybody, just like everybody, I would go up on the internet and I would like look, okay, how do you actually, what is this whole composition fuss about, and how do you go about doing it? So the first thing that comes up, and a lot of people that are taught even in art schools, is the rule of thirds, that you need to kind of place your element not in the center but somewhere on the intersection of those layout grids which are presented on the camera screen or the uh, phone screen. That kind of helps. I think that's a pretty potent rule that one can use. And I think secondly, cropping is very crucial. That has really helped me. So why cropping is actually crucial is that you have this huge environment around you, and now you're saying to yourself that okay, I'm going to decide that this particular scene from the surrounding, or this particular fragment of the surrounding is interesting to me, so I'm going to frame this and I'm going to capture it. So that decision in itself is what is very important, and is something any artist needs to develop over the time, that what do you want to show and what do you want to keep back. Because when you start out, you will see that you're taking images, but a lot of those images, they are not what you actually wanted to show, because they have so many distracting elements in them, right? So I think one needs to really understand this concept of cropping. How do you want to frame your particular image? And I think rule of thirds is a winner all the time. So yeah, just apply that and keep doing. That works.
So, Ashima, there is a follow up I have on that, and it also pertains to a question that one of the other students, one of some that has come from a student.
Yeah, sure.
Um, so, the question from the student is: some of the photographs that you showed were very complex. Were they arranged? How did it come to be this way? Especially the ones with people. So that is one of the questions that have come over, especially about the, I think referring to the Katia Bressot photograph and some of the other, I think the Alex Webb
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
photo that you showed. Um, but there is also another aspect to the entire thing, which is basically, the aspect on composition as the purest view of composition, which is basically get the full frame as it exists
Right.
and crop it.
Yeah. So I'm sorry, like the question is regarding the complexity, like did the person did not understand that how they've been made, or
Yeah, I think so. The question is, I can't. Sorry. How do they come to be this way? That is the question that was asked. How do they come to be this way, especially the ones with people?
sure.
And then there is this thing that we just mentioned about cropping. And the purest view is that students, or even in most schools, it is taught that you shouldn't crop. You should get the composition right within the frame as it exists.
Okay, so I agree that those images are kind of complex when it comes to the like how that composition has, whether it's deliberate, whether it's unconscious, it is complex in a certain way. And I showed those images of the people who have sort of developed a certain kind of language by doing this over and over and over the years. But when I started this presentation, I was talking about those different visual elements which are very crucial in, how you go about understanding a composition. So in those photographs particularly, certain elements were very well highlighted. Like if you remember, I showed the images of Cartier-Bresson, and usme the line work and the rhythm within the image and how the elements are placed, that's very crucial. So I think how they ended up being for anybody to create any image of that sort, or whatever image, I mean, they want to end up creating a well imposed composition, you will have to follow these certain elements and work around it. Like even to the earlier question, when you asked me that how can you start working with the composition, I think just take into account these elements and then see that you take into account these elements and then you see your own work and then you try to find that in your own work. I think that will really make you understand that how they are being played in your own photographs, and that will itself make you understand that okay, this is where I'm lacking and this is something that I could work on eventually. So just compare, keep those elements in your mind and see your own images, because you have to take a lot of photographs over the time, and then just keep seeing whether the line work is good here, whether there is rhythm, what is interesting about it, what is not interesting about it, what is the contrast, what is the color. So yeah, just keep those things in mind and then pursue it. So I think that does help in
So
reevaluating your own work.
basically, going back to that one tip that you gave, start shooting, start practicing and start thinking about it, start working with it,
Yeah, yeah.
rather than just reading about it somewhere and thinking about it.
Also, not just looking at okay, which camera should I buy first in order to go about shooting, because a lot of my own friends suffered from this problem, that they ended up buying these really fancy cameras and then they just got bored out of it because they were not getting the kind of results they had expected in their mind. It doesn't work like that. First you need to clear out your basics. So start with your own camera phone. Don't worry about the equipment. Just start shooting, seeing, keep collecting those images. And over the time, slowly, organically, it will start setting in that what works and what doesn't work. And then maybe, think about, okay, now I want to buy this or buy that. And then, yes, then you will see much better results and you will have more passion and motivation to work in that direction.
Coming back to my question, which I asked about cropping and using the entire frame as is,
Hmm.
because there's a purest view, which generally tends to go with saying that, if you're a good photographer, then you should not be cropping your pictures.
Right.
What would you have to say about that bit of it?
I think I am of the opinion that ultimately how you view the world is your view of the world. And if you if it's completely on you, I mean, if you feel that there is a scene and this works for you, I mean, how there is a certain kind of arrangement of the elements in that particular view, and you think that this is as good as it can be, so I think that is the most perfect composition. We are discussing, when I talked about composition all this while and I showed those images, maybe at that point of time they were scrutinized for how distorted their composition might be, or how these elements uh, might not be placed in a certain way, or how there is exaggeration, or how there is this and that. But over the time, because it challenges those ideas, so they were celebrated after a bit. So I think it really depends upon how you are viewing the world. For you, I think if that frame works and it's interesting enough, keep it. If it's not interesting enough, crop it, distort it, do whatever you want to do. It's really about you. And that sensibility is something that develops over the time. You cannot just expect that you see certain images on the internet and then you will be able to, get get the, you will be able to grasp the subtleties of it. It takes time to develop those sensibilities. Even I struggle with it sometimes, but that's the whole learning process. So yeah.
That was very, very well answered, Ashima. Very well answered. So just one, we have time for one last question, which I'm going to ask you. Um, this is a comment that came through, but you can comment on this comment.
Of course.
Art can be too personal, or is it just about expanding one's worldview?
That's a nice question. It can be both, and uh, it can be both collectively, and it cannot be both, because sometimes a lot of uh, the work that we make, I mean, we say that okay, we are making this work, and there is like this whole process of it, and we are committing so many mistakes that we don't like it. For us, that becomes a very personal work which we do not want to show, because somewhere in our head we think that's not good enough, and that personal work is like kind of thrown away somewhere. Whereas the ultimate result which comes out is kind of celebrated, that this is okay, this is what is my final result, and this is what it shows. So art art can be used as a kind of like a catharsis for you, but if you feel that you want to share your work, art will always have this ability that if you're going to share your world and if you're actually going to share your point of view, it will have a certain influence on people. It will definitely affect somebody or the other, especially if you're putting out on social media, because there's a huge invisible audience there in front of you. So it can be personal and it cannot be personal simultaneously. So I think that coexistence does happen. So it ultimately comes down to, if you want to just keep it for yourself and you're just doing it because you feel good doing it, I think that's great. You don't need to share it. But the advantage of actually putting it out there is that it still stays personal, and it is kind of being put out there. So it is impacting other people's ideologies or perceptions as well. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Ashima. Just to let me just add one little bit to that entire thing. Eventually, I think that sharing is very, very important,
Yeah,
especially if you want to move ahead and be known and as an artist. How would you do it without sharing?
definitely.
So I think it was a very wonderful session. Thank you so much.
Thank
That
you.
concludes our Q&A session for this evening.
Hope I have answered, I've given some answers that might help people to think about uh, the basics of what they're trying to pursue. And I hope that that there are certain takeaways from this session. And I'm glad that I just hope that people have not slept off and they kind of just took away
No,
something.
no, no, absolutely not, Ashima. In fact, it was a very, very informative session. Thank you for taking the effort to putting all those thoughts and slides together. It was very, very good.
Thank you so
Thank
much
you so
for the
much.
opportunity. Thanks.
Uh, for the audience, thank you for being here with us. There were some very, very relevant points that
Absolutely.
Ashima made today. Her tips in particular come to mind, because if you are thinking about some way to conclude this, then those tips come to mind. To develop the mind by gathering experiences and by observation. That is such a relevant tip. And Ashima's tip on constantly unlearning and learning. And of course, the fact that equipment is not really the key, because you have to start practice.
Right.
Practice is the key, not the equipment.
Yeah.
These are very significant tips in facing the challenge of composition and art. Thank you, Ashima, for sharing that with us.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
For the viewers, those of you who want to see more of Ashima Raizada's work, so you can simply do a Google search with her name. You'll find her on Instagram, uh, but that's Ashima Raizada without a space in between. Ashima Raizada on Instagram, and you'll see her work there. She's also there on Lens Culture. She has a wonderful set of images on Lens Culture. Some excellent work can be seen there. Uh, you've been an excellent audience too, and coming up with all those very, very interesting questions. The conclave will conclude tomorrow. Tomorrow is the September the 3rd at 6:30 to 7:30 p.m. We have our very last speaker for the Objective Students Career Conclave 2020. Zishan A. Latif is going to be providing us with some interesting tips on the creation of an excellent family album and the making of excellent family photos. You can register for the webinar at pmglive.in slash microsite 4. So this concludes this session of the Objective Students Education Conclave 2020 by HP and Intel in association with Better Photography. Do tune in tomorrow at 6:30 p.m. Once again, the link is pmglive.in slash microsite 4. Thank you all for watching and have a great evening ahead.